because this is the first time we're trying out some new webinar software, so I'm going to try not to move around too much, so hopefully it can record and people can hear me that are logged in online. Hopefully Mr. Andrews can see me that's logged in right now. I can see, and Steve. Of course, this is the first time I don't think I put together a actual visual presentation, so the people online aren't going to see much, just probably hear my ugly voice. But if I see a couple new faces, but if you haven't met me before, my name is Craig Griesbach. I'm the director of the building department for the county. There's some familiar faces, so it's nice to see a few new people here. How this kind of works is just, if you haven't been to one of these meetings before, it's sort of more of a discussion than it is a workshop or a presentation by me, just to talk about questions, issues, topics that are coming up, highlights of regulations, things like that. More just to keep the communication line open between usually a small group and our department and the county in general. So for the most part, if you have building or code compliance or cannabis compliance or anything like that related, I can answer those questions. Really anything county related, you can ask me and I might be able to answer it. If not, I can get you the answer later on. I can also add a couple of my cards with me. If for some reason you don't have my card or my contact, I can give that to you after the training. So, and for those of you listening online, if you submit questions throughout the session, I will hopefully pay attention to that and I'll respond as I see them come up. So, first item I was going to talk about that wasn't on the agenda, but I was just going to bring it up. I sent it to the Contractors Association as it's a new Senate bill that was passed over this last year, that it revolves around garage door openers, as silly as that may sound. Is as of July 1st, 2019, any garage door opener installed after that date has to have battery backup. So essentially, if the way that bill reads, if you have a permit and you obtain it today and you install a garage door opener in August, technically you have to put a garage door opener with battery backup. And the inspectors will be asking for that when they're there for the final inspection. What I would say is I've got a lot of questions from people asking, well, what about if we install it, in June and you guys do an inspection in August? Now what? I've just been telling people, we'll get a certificate of installation based on the date of installation. We'll accept that. I have a copy of that Senate bill here, and it's also scanned in online, so you should be able to see it with that specific verbiage. Any questions regarding that as far as?
New installations, not repairs?
That's new installation. So if it's a repair to an existing motor or something like that, I would say not. It just says new installations. So the purpose of that was all these fires and stuff we've had over the past couple of years, primarily elderly people, have been trying to get out of their garages and the power's out because of a fire and they get stuck in their home. They can't get out and they burn up in the fire. So basically what they wanted the battery backup on the garage door openers to where they'll operate at least a few cycles once power goes out. So it does have a legitimate purpose for some, circumstances, but that's really the purpose behind it, and that's why it came about. So you'll start seeing when tragedies happen, that's when codes and regulations change primarily and change quickly. So you'll see probably more related to the fire regulations changing in the next couple of years. Let's see. The next one I had on there was installation certificates. When are we requiring them at what time? So are you required to get an installation certificate? So like so Sierra Installation comes out and installs insulation in your new home or your addition or whatever else. A lot of times they'll give you an installation certificate. Basically, it's a one-page document that is shows your installation R values, what they installed in the attic, walls, all that stuff. So a lot of times it's pretty easy to see what they installed. blown-in insulation is primarily when we get them and when we require them, because you can't really, you can't tell an R value on blown-in value. Basically, they'll tell you the depth, the placement, the type of insulation, things like that. So when do we require a insulation certificate? What do you think, Josh?
I usually call it that PR.
Yeah.
Does that happen at time of inspection?
So generally, we don't require insulation certificates unless there's blown-in insulation, because we don't know what it is. But like Josh said, that there's a CF2R form, I believe is what it is, that he fills out that gives the certificate of insulation that he installed or whoever installed. So it's kind of the same thing. We could get it either or. I mean, it does the same exact purpose. Hey, Libby. Somebody online said they can't see anything on the screen related to handouts. And that's, I see that. You responded to it. Okay. The change for that I'll talk about here in a minute is related to QII inspection. Does anybody know what a QII inspection is?
Quality inspection for the party.
Yeah, so it's a quality insulation inspection. So that's essentially only required when you have HERS rating requirements. So HERS rating is like a third-party testing agency. So that's for your HVAC duct testing. That's for existing building components sometimes. That's for insulation verification. That's for your indoor air quality test, all that stuff. And that's driven by some mandatory measures in the energy code, as well as some performance methods. And I'll talk about both those. It's easy to get confused what those are. I'll differentiate those here a little bit once we get into some of the energy code requirements. So when we require the QII inspections, a lot of times they will require a insulation certificate. The actual third party will, prior to them doing that inspection. Any other questions on insulation certificates? The reason I asked, go ahead.
Yeah, we deal with Placer County, they're making contractors on house services use.
Yeah.
Which is kind of unique for us, because it shows up on our computer, and we fill out the
Yeah.
QR from there.
Uh-huh.
Will you be doing that for here?
So, meaning, they make you go on
We don't have
Cheers.
paper form at all. It's
Yeah.
all done.
So it depends. You can do either or. You can do paper, or you can do it online and show that you did it online. The only difference, a lot of people won't do it online because they don't have to get them registered. And a lot of times when you do them online, that's what the process you're going through is getting them registered. And the only time that's required is when there's HERS testing. So most homes now, based on the energy standards, don't require HERS rating for insulation, fenestration, for all the windows, building envelope. They don't require it, but you still have to have it for your homeowner's manual and all the other stuff. So you can do either or for us. So if you were to show us just on your device, you filed it and you had that information, that'd be fine. Yeah. Any other questions on that? Okay. Residential energy requirements at final inspection. So when you have a final inspection, you require a homeowner's installation manual. What is a homeowner's installation manual? Do I know? Yes. So basically, it's sort of like when you buy a new car, they give you a maintenance manual and all this other stuff, right? It's just like that for your home, where you get all the information for how to run your utilities, what they are, where your HVAC system is, information for transportation, water usage and reduction, all this other stuff, mainly energy and green building related. But basically, it's you get an owner's manual essentially when you buy a new car. Why wouldn't you get one when you buy a new house? Kind of the same principle. It stays with the life of the house. I have an example. This is kind of a template that we have that actually I think HCD put out, the Housing Community Development Agency. It's kind of just something you can fill out. So, and you can attach some stuff to it. So it's you can pass that around. And forewarning, I have a bazillion papers I'm going to give you today. I expect every single word to be written, or read, So the operation and maintenance manual, you look at it, has all this information. You just manually fill it out. So this is available on our website, and it's also available online. It talks about all these things you have to do, and you can use this as a template. Or you can make your own. We have a lot of contractors and a lot of subdivisions that get put in, have their own little binder they put together, essentially with all the same information. It's just a little bit more in depth. So as long as you meet the intent of this is one of the first things the inspector is going to ask from you for a final inspection on the house. So do I need this for an addition to my house? Okay. What if it's a 2,000 square foot addition to the house? The answer across the board is if it's an additional alteration, it isn't required as of today. So that is just for new construction. CF2R forms, or let's start off with, even though I don't have it on the agenda, CF1R. What is a CF1R form when we're talking about residential energy requirements? Anybody know? So essentially it gives you, they call it, it's a certificate of compliance. That's what a CF1R, and there's not a million, but there's a bunch of CF1R forms out there for each little thing. So if you're altering, installing new, a furnace, there's separate forms for that. If you're installing, or you're doing an addition, there's a couple different forms for that. So basically what it is a certificate of compliance saying what you're going to do and how you're complying with the energy code, essentially pre-construction. That's what a CF1R is. I made a copy of kind of what the alteration for an HVAC system looks like, just to give you an example. So what is a CF2R form? I mentioned earlier, Josh, what is it? CF2R. So a CF2R, yeah. So when you look up energy requirements, and this is one thing that frankly sucks as far as the energy code goes, is they have a million different forms for energy, and you get into non-residential, it's even worse. They have NRCA forms, NRCC forms, all this other stuff. All this is trying to give you the lingo, but kind of just a generality of what they are. So CF2R form is a certificate of installation. So like what Josh mentioned was at the final, he's filling out CF2R forms. Basically, he's filling out certificate of installation for windows, the envelope, insulation, electrical lighting, all the stuff that are components of the building, basically saying, I installed it, the components, this is what they are, they're in compliance as shown in the CF1R, basically matches my plans, and I certify it meets the energy code requirements. So it's the installer filling this out, essentially. So I have a copy of what a 2R looks like for installation. Try to say that 3 times fast.
And those are required in new construction.
So those are required in pretty much anything energy related. So you have an addition to your house, and you have windows, insulation, you have cool roof, whatever else, it's required for those as well. As of 2017. Well, technically since, probably 2008. But they've just been called different forms and different. But the primary changes has been this last code cycle, which was 2017. So a lot of times these are done by energy consultants, or if you're doing an addition or something like that, a lot of times the mechanical person will do that if they have ducting changes or whatever else. I guarantee this is something that isn't consistent throughout regionally as far as who enforces it, and even if we should be consistent, but it's something that we may not be doing for all the forms. This is the code minimum though. So we have a certificate of compliance. So basically your plans showing what you're going to do for the energy code. You have your CF2R, which is certificate of installation, and you have your CF3Rs. And I'm just talking, this is only residential. What's a CF3R? Okay, so a CF3R is essentially certificate of verification. So it's kind of a three-step process. So if you have a third party that's required to do HERS testing for your ductwork to check leakage, you're going to have a 1R telling us what you're going to do, a 2R from the installer telling us what they did, and a 3R from a third party telling us that they checked what they did and it's in compliance. Kind of crazy, really, when you think about it. But so the most common is ductwork, because all new installations of HVAC or alterations require HERS testing. Another one that's common in new construction is environmental air quality tests. So the exhaust fans and the hoods and however whole house fans they're trying to bring in outside air. So those are the most common today. But you can also have it for the QII inspections we mentioned earlier. You can have a 3R for that. So essentially, anytime you're required to have a third-party verification, that's when it requires all three. If you don't require a third party, you only require the 1R and the 2R. So 1R is at plan submittal, 2R is at project completion once the work's done, and 3R is at project completion once the work's done and it's been verified by the third party. So I printed off a 3R so you can see what that looks like. They all look substantially similar format-wise, just have a little bit of the different information in. So these ones, the 3Rs always have to be registered. That's through CalCerts or Tiers or whatever it is. They always have to be registered. They always have to have a registration number. So when the inspector comes out and looks at 3Rs for HVAC changeout, for example, he'll look at this and make sure there's a registration number, date, time, who the HERS provider is, and so on.
So is this considered as a Title 24?
So I'm even guilty of this. Title 24 has been marketed as energy, just in like the construction industry. Title 24 really isn't energy. Title 24 is the complete set of building standards codes. In California, Title 24 talks about the state mandated law. So Title 24 is building, fire, residential, all the codes. I think since like 2001, when energy got more and more important and it got pushed more in the state, everybody referred to it as Title 24, and I still do today because that's how I learned originally. It was called Title 24, and I still use it just because that's what everybody knows and they know what I'm talking about. But yes, and what you're talking about, that's the same thing. So it's all energy. Any questions about just general requirements for either homeowner's manual, energy forms, registering them when they're required, anything like that? Super confusing. I mean, I'm a regulator by trade, and I have a very hard time doing this. You know, I've met with the Energy Commission reps several times over the last several code cycles, and I told them the one thing they can improve upon is the forms of just, instead of calling it a CF1R and a certificate of installation, just say plan submittal, you know, or the CF2R is form required at final. Something simple, you know, to where it's not really big, but I don't think they'll ever change it. It's just sort of set in stone. Any questions? That might be a quick meeting here. So I've been asked a lot of questions about the 2019 standards and what are in there and what the changes are and things like that. To be honest with you, I haven't attended any trainings. I haven't read much on it yet. We're just starting to get into it right now. So midsummer, late summer, we'll have more information, more handouts and brochures regarding all the changes and things like that. But I want to go over a few of the main items that I do know about and have researched a little bit over the last couple of weeks. Oh, I skipped past something. So to simplify it for you guys, we completed this originally when the code cycle changed in 2017, but I forgot we had it. It's a form to list all the forms in the residential energy code. So it's six or seven pages of forms that they have. And these just list the forms themselves, the type. So what we went through is on a typical house, if you were to build a house, these are the forms you would probably need at final. So it highlights them through here, and you can kind of look that down. That way you don't have to go through here and, oh, I don't need to submit this because it's for a pool or a spa heating system or things like that. So it's sort of a cheat sheet for you. So we provided this back, like I said, in 2017 when we were doing all the hands-on trainings and code changes and things like that. But if I had to throw away all documents and keep one of them that I've given you, it would be that one, just because it's simple to follow. You can kind of simplifies it a little bit, narrows it down to what you need. So what's new for 2019? And we're just talking about residential, not non-residential today. So they have multi-day trainings just specific to this, and I'm going to try to talk about some of the just main points here for the next 30 minutes or so. The first document I'm going to give out to you is straight from the energy standards. They have a section in every energy standard. So the 2012, 2016, or 2013, 2016, and 2019, they have a section that says what's new for 2019. So I printed that out for you guys. That's straight out of that, and it summarized some of the major changes. So has anybody heard about mandatory solar on new house construction? You hear about that? So I'll talk about that a little bit more too, because I think that's a hot topic as far as what that really means. For new construction, there's a lot of worry that that's going to add additional costs to new construction, which has the potential of doing, but there are some exemptions as well. So to go over these, one of the ones, they put small stuff in here. You look at the mandatory measures. So what is a mandatory measure when we're talking about energy? You may know. So a mandatory measure is essentially something that applies to everything, and there's no way to get around it. There's no exception. You can't use a performance method. You can't take trade-offs. You can't do anything. It is a mandatory measure. It's a mandatory minimum. So prescriptive measure is what? A prescriptive measure is essentially, if I want to design something conventionally without compliant software, like running a performance method like for a new house or something like that. I was doing a 600 square foot addition and I want to just put minimum values in the walls and use minimum insulation in the attic. What do I do? That's what it means. So those are prescriptive compliance method. Doesn't mean it's mandatory though, because you can use a performance method and use trade-off to not do something. So for example, for the longest time, radiant barrier was a prescriptive requirement, not mandatory. So if you run a performance calculation with software, you can do trade-offs and do higher insulation values in the attic and maybe not do radiant barrier. That's what I mean by prescriptive. Does that make sense, everybody? And performance is essentially I'm using performance software to calculate the design of a building. So I'm taking trade-offs, I'm designing a building specific for the site, use orientation, the number of glazing and what orientation that's in, all this stuff I'm designing specific to the site. So I'm using a performance-based system. So essentially it's like the difference between building a house conventionally and installing brace walls and things like that for conventional framing in the California residential code versus using an engineer to design shear walls and shear transfer and bigger openings and perforations and stuff that you couldn't do in conventional. That same type of principle. So with the mandatory, some of the mandatory changes, they put things in here that change, but really aren't that big of a deal. For example, 2x6 framing today, what's the insulation minimum walls? R19. So forever, it's been R19. Now it's R20 for whatever reason. There is no R20 out there. There's R21. I mean, as far as I'm considering, unless you do spray foam or something like that. So now the minimum is R20, which essentially, if you're doing that, it'll be R21. Not really a big deal. Costs really aren't that much different for the most part.
Is that counting the R5 on the exterior, say rigid?
So that is just the cavity insulation. So there's different requirements for continuous, which they changed. I didn't read through that in here, but I've heard that they've changed that a little bit for the continuous insulation, depending on the assembly. So like what you're talking about, if I was to use a prescriptive design and I wanted to design my addition, there was a requirement for continuous insulation on the exterior if you didn't have a certain cavity insulation. So if I had 2x4 walls, you always had to do continuous insulation. That always meant, so if you design it prescriptively, you had 2x4 construction, you had max R15 insulation in the walls, you had to have R5 continuous insulation on the exterior. That means that you had to have that small foam on the outside under the siding, like you see with stucco and things like that. So that has evolved a little bit because they've changed those tables a little bit for prescriptive design, but we almost never see it with performance methods, just because they don't, I don't know, construction-wise is kind of a pain, depending on what type of siding you have. The things in here like fan efficiency requirements changed to 0.45. I have no idea what that means, to be honest with you, as far as how much changed from now. I don't even know how we would even check it in the field, even if we were to do it. So in mandatory measures, B, if you look at fan efficiency, yeah, and like even on C where it talks about they changed configurations such as horizontally attached buildings or central ventilation systems. For the most part, that's not going to affect anybody in here. What's that? Yes. Yep. So it's basically all based on fan design. For the most part, they're sort of moot points for me because a lot of times these are mandated at the manufacturer level to where they have to manufacture them to meet these standards. So it's not sort of a fail safe, I guess, for me. Yeah, and it's I don't know. And I guess from a building inspection perspective, I'm not going to have the time to check this type of item anyway. And so a lot of times, like I said, a lot of times it's handled through the manufacturer's side. And even the next one, like I said, down, they talk about horizontally attached buildings. That's not going to affect 99% of the projects we have. They just mention them in here as substantial changes because these apply to everybody, right? These apply to downtown San Francisco just like they do in the county, and that's part of the problem, to be honest. You know, building a house on 20 acres in the county on ag zone parcel, totally different than building downtown San Francisco, but a lot of the requirements are the same with the exception of like climate zone. So it's just something to think about. For your mechanical guys out there, they're installing filters. The filters are changing, and these, you know, you can easily check this because it says it on the filter, to a MERV 13. So what it is today is a MERV 6. So essentially it's twice as more restrictive, so it's twice as more filtered, I guess you could say. That makes sense. That's something that will be changing. So the filters that was on D. And E on the bottom, it says new fan efficiency requirements for small duct high velocity forced air systems. Has anybody seen like the ducted mini split systems that are really, really small? Most of the ones you'll see will be bigger regular ducts. But there are some newer systems they're designing that are smaller ductwork, and they have higher fan velocity to push more air. So you may be seeing it as this newer technology, but it's not commonplace now. That's the code section. So those sections are, if you look in the energy code and the energy standards, that's the section. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. So again, I haven't seen one in the county yet, but just something that has changed. I'll skip. I'm not going to hit every single one of these, just the ones that I think from now on that I know we've seen at times. On the prescriptive compliance on B, it says removing the attic roof option A with above deck insulation. So does anybody know what a high performance ventilated attic is?
Insulated at the top floor?
Right. So essentially it's insulated at the ceiling level and at the roof level, wherever the rafters are the top core of the truss. So they have a bunch of different options for this. In the standards, they had an option with radiant barrier. You had a high performance method, and that was option A, that had ceiling, cord, and radiant barrier. Why is that silly? Because
Covering the radiant barrier.
it essentially cancels out the radiant barrier, because radiant barrier doesn't work without the airspace, or work as it's listed without the airspace. So they realized that when in the new cycle, so they took that option away. It drives me nuts when energy designers put that on the plans as requiring radiant barrier and the high performance method, because it's a moot point. You're sort of double doing it, and you're just costing a little bit more money for materials. Yeah, you got to do it. So now that's not going to be an option. So they're actually doing something that makes sense. Kind of good. Let's see. Down to E, quality QII is now a prescriptive requirement. So after this next year, you're going to start seeing a lot more of these third-party insulation inspections take place than they are today. So I'm going to start talking to some of the other regional departments, because I don't know how exactly we're going to handle it, because to me, you know, we do insulation inspections, right? We require them. I think most jurisdictions do. Some of them allow insulation certificates in place, but I would say most require insulation inspections. To me, if you have you have a third party that's professionally trained in only doing those inspections, and we get a report from them, why do we need to go out on that inspection? It doesn't make much sense to me. So I'm going to talk to the other agencies, you know, counties and cities around us, and see if we can get a consistent approach with that if that occurs. It'd just save everybody time and money if we didn't have to double do it, I guess, sort of thing. That makes sense? So bottom line is, you're going to start seeing that more and more, because even though it's a prescriptive requirement and you can do trade-offs and do something a little bit different, you get penalized a lot of times for that. So if you don't do the prescriptive measure, you get penalized in points, and sometimes it's impossible to make it up somewhere else. A lot of times they'll just include this in there. Let's see. So new solar generated, so basically new rooftop solar requirements. I'll go over that in depth here in just a moment. What else? And that is pretty much on the back. There's some discussion about additions, alteration, changes related to prescriptive requirements for QII inspections, insulation standards, things like that. For the most part, even though they're going for zero emissions 2020 for residential, that's why you're seeing some of these solar requirements coming into place, because you're getting the net zero energy, but you still have to produce that energy to make up for whatever you're using, right? So the only method was solar, essentially. But globally, from the energy code perspective, I don't think it's as many changes in this cycle as it was in the last cycle. I mean, the last time we were talking about total different changes in lighting, switching, total changes in cool roof requirements, insulation requirements. Now we're not. A lot of times the little changes they're making, like for lighting, is they're clarifying things for LED usage, clarifying switching, fixing some of the insulation things that didn't make sense. So it was a lot more cleanup, I think, this time than actual major changes, with the exception of the solar requirements. Any general questions related to energy changes or things like that?
On the QII inspections, is that going to include remodel and additions?
So in the back, if you look at, it's prescriptively required for additions 700 square feet or more. So if it's not over that, then it won't be. It's kind of like the indoor air quality requirements for new construction. It's not required for additions less than 1,000 square feet, and that stays the same. It changes too. It's kind of the same type of deal. Once you do larger improvements where it's almost like new construction, that's when they start triggering that stuff in there. We'll also hand out, there's little summary off of the website that I had looked at a couple weeks ago regarding quick changes, and it's a website called VCA Green. It has some of the changes in there as well. Okay, these are the last handouts I'm going to give you, I promise. I know, I put on my backpack on the motorcycle over here. I felt like I'm going to throw my back out. So this is related to solar. So this is straight from the code in the 2019 standards. This is the only code that is for the 2019 California Building Standards Code that is published, yet all the other ones haven't even been published yet. So we're kind of waiting to see what the changes are in the residential code and things like that. So the first one is this one that has the number 7 at the top. Actually is the specific requirements for rooftop solar requirements, solar ready, multifamily buildings, things like that. Is related to exceptions and things like that, related to the shading. So I'll get into the second document here in a minute. So the main thing is prescriptively, as a general requirement, every new construction has to have a rooftop solar system installed in general, across the board, unless you meet one of the exceptions. So before I get to that, what is the minimum size you think these are designed for? Like what size solar system do I have to put on a house? If I have to put a solar system on, how do I determine the size? So they have an equation on here because they're brilliant on the front cover, which is basically depends on the area of the house and your climate zone. So I did just some math real quick before I came over here just to see how big of a typical system would be in climate zone 11. So essentially everywhere but Truckee or Soda Springs up the hill is climate zone 11 in the county. So 2,000 square foot new dwelling, did the math, it's a little over a 3 kilowatt system. So Mr. Cal Solar back there, how many panels is that approximately? 3 kilowatts, so if it's a little over a 3 kilowatt system. So, yeah. No, as far as I know from what I've read in here, they're not taking in any of the basically production factors that realistically happens out in the field. Yeah, yeah. So
300 watt panels?
300.
Or
10 300 watts.
So those online are saying is 300 watt panels. So depending on wattage of the panels, essentially it's like between 10 and 15.
Roughly. Like the AC microinverters they're putting out there, no matter what panel rated at, 360 watt panel, 350 watt.
So approximate cost of something like that, just a standard system, 20 grand. So that's something to think about if you have to put a new system on there. That's an additional. Yep. So with that said, that's just the standard for like a 2,000 square foot home in the county, in our climate zone. There's a list of, if you flip the page, to page, I think it's 7.2 in the upper left, that's when the start of the exceptions. So the main ones I think a lot of the places in the county are going to meet one of these exceptions. If they meet one of these exceptions, generally they're going to have a solar ready area meaning what's a solar ready area? So solar ready is essentially a spot where you can eventually maybe put solar. So you're planning on, so if I need to have a 80 square feet for this size system, I'm having a solar ready area. So if, you know, we ever take trees out or whatever else, I'm ready. I have conduit installed, everything ready to go to where it's plug and play. That's what solar ready means. Exactly. No skylights that you have to go over or anything like that. So it's basically, you're saving the spot for ready. Yeah. So that requirement already exists in the current code. It only applied to subdivisions with 10 or more residences or non-residential. So like if a couple of the new buildings are going up in the Loma Rica area, they have to have a certain percentage or square footage of solar ready area. They're just applying it down to single family dwellings related to most of these exceptions. So the main exception is if you look at, it's in this one. So if you go to page 7.5, which is a couple pages back, there's a diagram of a house. So this is obviously the most simplistic example that they give regarding shading. So essentially, if they say you have barriers, that the height is half of whatever the distance is away. So if I have a dormer on here that is 4 feet tall, so that H is 4 feet, the D from that measurement would have to be 8 feet, or it would be considered it would be a shaded area. That's anything. So that could be dormers, that could be trees, that could be mountains, that could be your 3-story neighbor's house, that could be anything that meets this requirement. I think around here, trees. I mean, it's not always going to be the case. You know, there's a lot of areas that are built out in the open where there's no trees, so you're not going to have it. But Nevada City, I mean, almost everyone we build with, there's some sort of shading. And it might not be enough to cancel you out completely, but it might have to put you in a different portion of the roof. So, for example, so what I drew up there is just, you may have a tree that has that same calculation, right? So you have a 100-foot tree and that house is right next to it. You got to be 200 feet away or to be able to be considered not unshaded area. You know what I mean? Does that make sense at all? So, correct. Yeah. So basically, if that house roof area is less than 200 foot away with that 100-foot tree, it's all shaded area. So how on your plan submittal do you illustrate this? Because we don't typically, when we get building elevations, things like that, but we don't, on residential construction, we don't ask for landscaping plans and where all your trees are at or anything like that. Commercial, we do. So how do you illustrate this on if you submit a FUR project this next year? So from my perspective, I always think about this, like every year that goes by, there's additional requirements we require on plans. And it's like, whatever I can do to not do that, because we have enough problems as it is. I mean, when we do plan reviews, it's like, really, this is what we're getting? You know, sometimes. So we don't want to make it more challenging when we don't. And it's not always the case, though. You know, it's like the HVAC duct sizing, things like that. You know, that's something that I think is a little silly for residential construction, but the energy code mandated it last year. But there are some things we can do that I think meet the intent of this. So for example, if you're claiming one of the exemptions, it's on the onus of the applicant to, show us how they're meeting that exemption. So if it's just a simple note on the plan, or if it's a simple note on your energy calculations, basically saying, we have several 100-foot cedars within 100 feet of the residence, it meets that shading calculation, you just show us that on that plan. We'll verify that when we go out in the field.
And it's not north, south, east, west.
No. And there's all kinds, I'm not going to go through every exception, mainly because I don't understand all the exceptions yet, because I haven't gone through any training or got any feedback from third parties yet. But the key is, if you're using one of these exceptions as you go through here, that you prove to us how you're doing it. Whether that be simple notes on the plans, or that be an elevation showing trees, or a landscaping plan, it really doesn't matter to me as long as there's information on the plan to where we can do that. Where the field inspector can go out and, if he sees no trees around and there was a solar exemption exception claimed, he can go on the plan. It's like, oh, well, you guys hadn't planned on taking all of these trees, and you did. Now we need to figure out some sort of solar system for this. So either that, or you guys better plant trees real quick, maybe. I say that because I guarantee you that's going to happen. When we get out to a final, and you're like, well, I planted these trees.
And this tree in 15 years.
Yeah, we're going to get that argument, I guarantee.
Still gotta make it solar ready.
So there's different requirements. For the most part, what it says in here, if you look at the very beginning of the overview on page 1, it says the requirements for solar ready buildings are mandatory measures for newly constructed single-family homes and new low-rise multifamily residential buildings that do not have a photovoltaic system due to an exemption. So that's what requires it across the board. There's other standards in here. If you look at what solar ready really means, I think that's in here somewhere.
You make it solar ready for a ground unit or without, shade?
So I just looked here. There isn't. I must have not printed that part out. There's standards for solar ready. What's really required. So basically, the general requirement for that is conduit area on the roof safe for whatever size system you need, and space in the panel for like a 40, 60 amp breaker, whatever you need to be able to accommodate that. It's very similar to the. You guys know about the EV charging requirement for new residences. It's very similar to that, to where you have conduit, everything ready there to just plug in. So, California Solar comes out, they can go out and pull wire right away, right straight to the spot. Hopefully it's not on the shaded side or something, you did. So that's what it means.
We do that, I've been on the roof, but sometimes they want to have solar ready out.
So I think based on these exceptions, I don't think so, but I would consider it. If you wanted to justify that and you were going to run conduit out into an area that made more sense because it is heavily shaded and you're not ever going to take out any trees, sure. Yeah, we'd consider that. It would be an alternate we'd have to review during the plan review, but it makes sense. Yeah, there's a tons of different examples. So if it makes sense and meets the intent of the code, that's all you have to prove. Even if it is an alternate and you have to go through that process of applying for the alternate means and methods, it's still the same. You're meeting the intent of the code. So the same thing would be the case by case. What you would be showing us how you're meeting the intent and why you need that justification. The J811, it's like all these energy code references. I got introduced to the joint appendix as this last code cycle because anybody know what JA8 is? So there's a light bulb standards. So there's light bulb standards that you can meet for energy code compliant screw shelves, essentially. So
don't understand that. Not a problem.
There isn't a whole lot of JA8 listed products. That's part of it, part of the problem. But doesn't really, you still have to do everything switching wise, you still have to do there's certain fixtures you can't have J8 bulbs like downlights, you can't have those in. It's basically a listing for the bulb. So basically the bulb is high efficiency, not the fixture. Because historically the fixture is always required to be the listed energy code. Yeah, so this last code cycle they introduced bulbs, which to me makes sense. If you want to make a change, regulate at the manufacturer level to where people can't get non-compliant bulbs, and it solves the problem for everything. Don't make us installers and regulators deal with it. And just don't even allow it to be out there. So they're slowly going that way. I think 10 years from now we'll laugh about it because they won't be able to get anything. It isn't, but right now we're kind of in that transition period. Sorry, the JA8, which is this 2-page document. J11, sorry, Scott, jeez. So basically this is their qualification requirements. So this talks a little bit more in depth about minimum shading criteria related to neighboring terrain, basically exactly what we just talked about, but it talks about it more in depth. It's not in the actual body of the code, it just refers to this, if that makes sense. So if you're designing to meet one of those exceptions, this sort of clarifies a little bit more. It talks about it more in depth and what qualifies, what doesn't, how you calculate that. I mean, potentially, I guess you could put a chimney, right in the middle of your house, and meet that requirement technically, but I don't know. Yeah, I know. I always tell people, because we get questions like this all the time about, well, what if I do this? Well, what if I do that? It's like, don't design your project around trying to meet exemptions. It's going to cost you more in the long run doing that. With that said, it's hard to convince that sometimes. So again, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this because I'm learning this new just like anybody else. Later on this summer, like I said, we'll have more information, we'll have more in depth, and I'll be educated a little bit more on that. We're actually sending some staff up to Truckee tomorrow for zero net energy training related to this. So we'll have some staff that have a little bit more knowledgeable than me as well, that sort of train the trainer approach. But the general idea is just keep in mind, that this is a requirement, and if it is something that would apply to your project, you may have some additional costs that you're going to have to start educating your customers on and what the options are moving forward. And when you're bidding jobs, you're going to have to include this sort of thing. So, correct. It's new construction. So how this always happens in the energy code, though, is it starts in new construction, and then it works its way into additions, alterations. Like I said, the QII inspection thing used to not be required for any addition whatsoever. Now it's required for additions over 700 square feet. So the next code cycle, maybe it'll be required for additions over 300 square feet. That's how the California Building Standards Code in general, not just energy, that's how it usually happens. So gray water systems, for example, they weren't in the plumbing code back in the late 2000s. They put it in an appendix chapter in 2010, and now it's in the body of the text. It eventually works its way in. That's how it comes in. If you notice that, a lot of people don't realize that what happens, but that's how it works its way in. I don't know why they do that specifically. Another one. Yep. All the links to the codes are online and available online, PDF, and HTML. So you can go online. Or you can just Google them and it'll pop right up too. Another example, something that I'm sure will be in the body of the code, is in the residential code, there's standards in the appendix for tiny home construction. So it's pretty vague right now, but again, I imagine that eventually is going to be a chapter in the building code at some point in time. Yeah, I mean, it's been sort of a trend that's happening for a while. So with that, I don't think I have anything else I was going to talk about. Always like to open it up for any discussions or things that's happening, or you had an inspection and you didn't hear about this or hear about that, or even just general questions, something that's not even happening in the county. You may have any general questions or discussions or concerns. Yeah, hopefully questions, not concerns.
Yeah, spray foam, we do a lot of spray foam, we're insulating contractors.
Yeah.
And where it's different per county how we do spray foam.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Bosch is really strict. They've added more codes through the years.
So really strict meaning what?
On how things are interpreted, thermal emission.
Okay.
You know, little Cuban things, they're seen it as one.
Okay. So meaning how, like, give us a situation example of what that would look like.
Yeah, we do spray foam mostly in the ceiling. And the code states that, you know, you have spray foam up there. You have to have sheetrock, private sheetrock between the spray foam and what most places have.
Yeah.
This is, you know, up there, there's drop ceilings or whatnot, there's space up there.
Yeah.
And they're interpreting, we put R19 over the foam, which kind of does condition picture.
Yeah.
And then there's private sheetrock down below. But they're interpreting it differently, and they want thermal up touching our foam.
So we've always interpreted the thermal barrier as a barrier between living and uninhabitable space. So regardless if that's in a drop ceiling or it's directly up against it or not, to me, I don't think the code is that specific. I think it just has to have a thermal barrier, meaning whatever requirement it is in between. Right. So that's, as far as I know, that's how we've always enforced it. Where we see most of the spray foam is a high country area. I mean, we see some down the hill, but not a ton.
We'll be doing more of it with the high performance attic.
Yeah.
It's just harder for us to be crawling up there trying to get fiberglass to stay up in that 24
Yeah.
So we can go and spray it one day.
We always try to encourage people to use that in vaulted areas rather than trying to ventilate that space, because if you have bad insulation, you got to have a 1-inch air gap and vented top and bottom. It's just a pain, way easier, even though it's a little bit more expensive to spray foam it. It's going to save you a lot more man hours and everything else. So we always try to tell people to just spray foam it. It's so much easier, better installation and everything anyway.
It's cheaper.
Oh, long run, yeah, it's cheaper. I guarantee you it's cheaper long run. Yeah. Any other questions or things that are going on?
What's number 3?
Number 3.
On your green sheet where it says the specific requirements for domestic solar hot water to be used. It's on the back page of this.
Back page of, somebody hand me one of those things. So I believe this is if you're designing. A lot of these requirements are related to like radiant floor or recirculation systems. There's a bunch of different types of water heating systems that you can design a building with, whether it's standard, loop system, recirc system, all this stuff. Generally if you design systems with a standard water heating system and it's not radiant heating for, none of this applies. It's like if you install this certain method, I think that's what we're talking about.
Okay.
Any other questions? Hopefully I can answer. Anything else? Anything else you guys want as topics moving forward either?
A little bit of discussion with the QII.
Mm-hmm.
We've had not a problem or anything, but we came across where since the QI is owned by Homeowner, which is, you know, a private company.
Yeah.
You guys come in, check their insulation, pass it, and it's up to code, and then the Homeowner comes in and has his own opinion and interpret what a QI inspection.
Yeah.
And fail.
So I would say, well, any person you have, regardless if it's, you know, this county, Placer, whatever, we're all going to have a little bit different opinions on what something should be for certain things. I mean, everybody knows that. I would say the QII inspector is going to be more critical and spend more time as well, and he's going to be specifically trained only in that. And I can imagine if I was just doing insulation inspections all day, every day, how good you would probably get at it in a good and bad way, I guess. So I think that's the purpose of the QII, is a lot of building departments, there's certain things they're missing, I think, depending on what it may be, based on sealing around, penetrations, cleanliness of installation, things like that. I would say for us, I would hope that doesn't happen too often, and if that was happening, I would want to know what it was and see if it's legitimate or not, if it's something maybe we're missing. Because I don't want to come out and say everything's all good, regardless if it's insulation or shear or whatever, and then somebody else come out and say, well, man, who the heck inspected this thing? That's the last thing I want to hear. So I guess I just want to know the specifics about what it was. That makes sense. Any topics you'd like to see in the future, besides like code change stuff, obviously, which will be coming down the pipe? Any specific projects you're working on? You guys ready to go home? Yeah? All right. All right. I don't have anything else. You guys don't. All right. Cool. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thanks, Fred.